Hello, Muslim friends in the world. It was a bright Sunday morning in Dallas, Texas. The air was warm, the sun pouring through the stained glass windows of the city's largest evangelical church, the House of Grace. Every pew was filled. Thousands of believers had gathered, their voices rising together in worship. Cameras were rolling. The service was being broadcast live across the state. At the center of it all stood Pastor John Matthews, a man revered by millions. For more than 25 years, he had been the voice of hope for the American faithful. Eloquent, compassionate, and unshakably confident in his message. To his followers, he was more than a preacher. He was a shepherd of souls. A man who had dedicated his life to guiding others to salvation. But that morning, something was different. Those who knew him sensed it. A stillness in his expression, a tremor in his voice. His Bible lay closed on the podium. For the first time in decades, he began not with scripture, but with silence. He looked over the crowd. Thousands of faces waiting, expecting a sermon about faith, redemption, or resurrection. Instead, he took a deep breath and said softly, "My brothers and sisters, today I must tell you something that will change everything." A murmur rippled through the hall. "For years, I've preached about truth," he continued, his voice trembling. "But I've come to realize truth cannot belong to one people alone. It cannot be confined within a single book or a single language. Truth is universal, and God is one." The words hung in the air like thunder. No one moved. Some thought it was a metaphor, a prelude to another sermon. But then he said it. The words that would echo across news networks, social media, and living rooms around the world. After years of searching, of reading, and of praying for clarity, I have found peace in the message of Islam. Gasps filled the hall. A woman in the front row dropped her hymnal. One of the assistant pastors froze in disbelief. The music stopped. The air seemed to vanish. John's eyes glistened as he looked out at his congregation, his friends, his students, his spiritual children. "I know this will be difficult to understand, but I cannot stand here and preach something I no longer believe. The God I worship now is the same Creator, but I've come to know Him as Allah, the One without partners." The silence turned into whispers. Some cried, others left the hall in shock. But John stood firm, his hands resting on the podium, his heart unburdened for the first time in his life. Outside, reporters were already gathering. Inside, thousands sat in stunned disbelief. And as the cameras captured the moment that would soon circle the globe, Pastor John closed his eyes and whispered quietly under his breath, "Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim." The sound was soft, almost lost in the vastness of the hall, but to him, it was the most powerful beginning of all. That Sunday would be remembered not as the day a preacher fell, but the day a man found truth.
Long before that fateful Sunday, the questions had already begun. It started quietly, in the middle of an ordinary night, inside Pastor John Matthews' study. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling: theology, philosophy, biblical history, Christian apologetics. For years he had trusted those pages, but lately every verse he read raised another question instead of giving an answer. He would read the Gospel of John, pause, and stare at the text. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." He had preached that line 1,000 times, yet now something inside him whispered, "Does that truly mean God became man, or have we misunderstood?" He tried to dismiss it. He prayed harder, preached louder, buried himself in ministry. But the unease grew, gnawing at him in the quiet hours of the night. Sometimes he would walk through the empty church after midnight, the echo of his footsteps blending with his thoughts. He began to wonder, if Jesus prayed, who was he praying to? The more he studied, the more contradictions surfaced. Verses about the oneness of God stood side by side with claims of divine sonship. He found comfort in neither. One evening, during Bible study, a young theology student asked him, "Pastor, if God is one, why do we say he is three?" John smiled gently, as he always did, but his heart trembled. That question, simple, innocent, followed him home and refused to leave.
At night, he opened his old notebook, once filled with sermon outlines. Now it was filled with scribbles, arrows, and underlined words. Trinity, monotheism, original sin, salvation. In one corner, he had written 3 words that would come to define his journey. What if wrong? Weeks turned into months. His wife noticed the change, the sleepless eyes, the distant look. He no longer sang hymns at home. His sermons grew quieter, slower, more reflective. He often quoted prophets from the Old Testament instead of the New. The congregation thought he was entering a spiritual phase. They didn't know he was entering a spiritual crisis. One winter evening, he visited a university to give a lecture on comparative religion. After the talk, a young Muslim student approached him, holding a small, beautifully bound book. "Pastor," the student said respectfully, "you speak so much about faith. Would you ever read the Quran?" John hesitated. For a moment, he wanted to decline, but something in the boy's sincerity disarmed him. He accepted it with a nod. "Thank you," he said. "I'll take a look." That night, back in his study, he opened the book for the first time. The first words he read stopped him cold. "In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful." Something stirred deep within him, a calmness, a clarity. He turned the page and read, "Say, He is Allah, the One, Allah, the Eternal. He begets not, nor is He begotten, and there is none comparable to Him." He closed the book slowly and leaned back, eyes wet, whispering to himself, This is what I've always believed. I just never had the words." From that night on, he could no longer silence the questions. And deep down he knew the answers were no longer in the place he had always called home. It began with a single verse, then another, and another. Every night, when the world outside his home went quiet, John Matthews would return to that small green book, the one given to him by the Muslim student. He read it in secret, afraid that someone might find out. The irony was not lost on him. A man who had preached before millions, now hiding his reading like a forbidden act of rebellion. At first, he approached the Quran as a scholar, critical, analytical, cautious. But soon his heart began to do what his mind could not. It listened. He was struck by how the Quran spoke, not in the voice of prophets or poets, but as the direct speech of God Himself. There were no elaborate genealogies, no human authors claiming divine inspiration. Every word began with the same invocation, "In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful." The more he read, the more he felt as though the book was reading him. He reached Surah Maryam, the chapter about Mary, the mother of Jesus. He expected rejection, argument, or blasphemy. Instead, he found reverence. The Quran called her chosen above all women. It spoke of Jesus, not as God, but as a prophet, born miraculously by the will of Allah.
and yet nowhere did it claim what he had always been taught, that Jesus was divine. John closed the book slowly, overwhelmed. For years he had struggled with that very question, how to reconcile the humanity of Jesus with the idea of his divinity. But here, in these simple, direct words, he found an answer that felt pure, unforced, and whole. He began taking notes in the margins. Consistent, rational, uncompromising monotheism, words he had never used to describe religion before. One night, he stopped at a verse that pierced him like a blade. This is the book about which there is no doubt, a guidance for those conscious of God. Surah Al-Baqarah 2 verse 2. No doubt. For years, his faith had been haunted by doubt, shadows he could never fully chase away. But here was a voice that spoke without hesitation, without contradiction, a voice that demanded not blind belief, but understanding. He whispered the words loud, tasting each syllable carefully. La ilaha illa Allah. There is no God but Allah. The simplicity of it shook him. No intermediaries, no saints, no Trinity. Just God, alone, absolute, beyond imagination. He began to notice something else too. Peace. Every time he finished reading, an unexplainable calm filled his chest. It was the same calm he used to seek through prayer, but had never truly found.
It was an instinct more than a decision. Something his soul seemed to remember, though his body had never done it before. And there, on the cold floor of his study, John Matthews prostrated for the first time. No choir, no stained glass, no audience. Just him and the one he now called Allah. Tears poured down his face, not of guilt, but of release. All the years of doubt, fear, and inner conflict dissolved in that single moment of surrender. He whispered through the sobs, "If this is your truth, let me follow it, even if it means I lose everything." He stayed like that for minutes, maybe hours. He couldn't tell. When he finally rose, his heart felt lighter than it had in decades. He looked at the Quran again, and for the first time, he smiled. "So this," he said softly, "is what peace feels like." The next morning, his wife found him asleep on the floor, the Quran still open beside him. She saw the tear stains on his cheeks and the faint smile on his lips. He never spoke about what happened that night. But those who saw him afterward noticed something different. His voice calmer, his eyes gentler, his sermons shorter but deeper. And though he still wore the same suit, stood at the same pulpit every Sunday, inside he was no longer the same man. That night, John Matthews didn't lose his faith. He finally found it. The confession did not come easily. For months after that night of tears, John Matthews tried to live two lives. The pastor the world knew, and the believer he was becoming in secret. He still led Sunday services, still spoke of grace and salvation, but every word felt heavier. He no longer saw himself in the pulpit. He saw a man standing between what was true and what was safe. His wife had grown quiet. She watched the changes. The way he no longer said, "In Jesus' name," at the dinner table. How he spent long nights reading the Quran instead of preparing sermons. One evening, as they sat in silence, she finally asked, "John, do you still believe in what you preach?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. The silence was enough. By winter, Rumors began to spread. An assistant pastor found a Quran on his desk. Another overheard him speaking to a Muslim colleague at the university. Within days, whispers turned into headlines. Pastor Matthews in crisis of faith. Texas megachurch leader embracing Islam. The church board called an emergency meeting. They sat in a circle. Men he had mentored, prayed with, and baptized. Now their faces were cold, their voices sharp. "John, this is madness," one said. "Do you realize what you're doing to this ministry?" "You've been misled," said another. "These Muslims have confused you." He listened quietly, hands folded, eyes down. When they finished, he spoke softly. "I'm not confused. For the first time in my life, I see God clearly. Not as three, not as a mystery, but as one." The room erupted. "Blasphemy!" one shouted. "You've lost your faith!" another cried. He stood up slowly, voice steady but heavy with grief. "No, I've found it." That was the last meeting he ever attended at the church. Within a week, his name was erased from the ministry website. His sermons were removed from the archives. Friends stopped calling. Former students avoided him in public. At home, the isolation deepened. Some nights, he sat in the dark, watching the city lights flicker beyond the window. A world that once admired him now turned its back. His wife packed her bags quietly one morning. She stood by the door, tears streaming down her face. "I don't hate you, but I can't follow you down this path." He didn't try to stop her. He only nodded. As the door closed behind her, he realized that truth sometimes demands more than courage. It demands sacrifice. For weeks, he lived alone. No church, no friends, no family. Only the Quran, a prayer rug, and the voice in his heart that told him he had done the right thing. Every dawn, he would rise, wash his hands and face, and kneel toward the east, learning slowly, clumsily, how to pray. Each prayer healed a wound. Each prostration rebuilt something inside him that the world had broken. And though the world saw a fallen pastor, John Matthews was being reborn. He had lost everything: reputation, wealth, belonging, but gained something no one could ever take away: the peace that comes only when a soul surrenders to the truth. The day was quiet, a soft, golden afternoon in Dallas, the kind that made the air shimmer with heat and light. There was no crowd this time, no cameras, no choir. Just a small masjid at the edge of the city, modest, white-walled, with the faint sound of Arabic recitation drifting from within. John Matthews stood outside the door for a few minutes, motionless. He wore a simple shirt and trousers. No suit, no tie, no cross around his neck. Only a trembling hand clutching the same Quran that had changed his life. He could hear his heart pounding. Inside, a few men were preparing for Asr prayer. One of them noticed him and smiled kindly. "Peace be upon you, sir. Are you visiting?" John hesitated. His throat tightened. "Yes," he said softly. "I came to learn how to say what my heart already believes." The man's eyes warmed with understanding. He gestured for him to follow him inside. They entered a small prayer hall, simple, clean, and calm. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting soft patterns on the carpet. For a moment, John just stood there, taking in the silence. a silence unlike any church he had ever known.
The Imam approached, an elderly man with a gentle face. He spoke in a calm voice that carried both wisdom and kindness. "You have come for something special, haven't you?" John nodded. Tears already blurred his vision. "I've searched for years and I found it here." The Imam smiled. "Then say with me, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah." John repeated slowly, voice trembling. "Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah." "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." The words left his lips like a weight being lifted off his soul. He exhaled deeply, and for the first time in his life, he felt completely free. The men in the room smiled, some embracing him with tears in their eyes. "Welcome, brother. Welcome to Islam." John, now Ysef Matthews, fell to his knees, unable to hold back the emotion. He cried not from sadness but from overwhelming peace. He thought of the years of searching, the nights of doubt, the pain of rejection, all of it leading to this moment of surrender. As he prayed beside his new brothers for the first time, his forehead touched the ground again. This time, it wasn't an act of confusion or desperation. It was gratitude. The Imam placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Allah chooses whom He wills. Today, He has chosen you." After the prayer, Ysef sat quietly near the door, the Quran resting on his lap. The call to Maghrib began to echo outside. "Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar." He closed his eyes and smiled. For years, he had listened to choirs sing Amazing Grace. But now, as the adhan filled the sky, he realized this was the true sound of grace. The world had already begun to whisper. Rumors about John Matthews, the once celebrated pastor of Dallas, had spread far beyond Texas. Some said he had disappeared. Others claimed he'd joined a cult. News outlets speculated endlessly, trying to fill the silence he had left behind. But no one expected what happened next. It was a Sunday morning, almost a year since he had left the church. The same church that had once echoed with his sermons was now crowded again, cameras rolling, reporters packed outside. Because that morning, a message had gone out. Pastor Matthews will return to speak one last time. When he walked onto the stage, the crowd fell completely silent. No choir sang, no music played. Only the faint hum of anticipation filled the air. He looked older, his beard fuller, his posture humbler. The cross that had always hung around his neck was gone. In its place was a calm that no one had ever seen before. He stood before the same podium where he had once preached for 25 years. The lights felt hot, his throat tightened. He took a deep breath and looked out at the thousands of faces before him, faces that had once adored him and some that now despised him. "My friends," he began softly, "you've heard many things about me, some true, many not. But today I didn't come to defend myself. I came to speak the truth, the same truth I have spent my whole life searching for." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some looked down, others stared, waiting. "For years, I preached that salvation came through a man, that God walked the earth, that he could die, that he needed sacrifice. But my heart could never fully accept it. I prayed for clarity, for peace, and for truth.
and God answered me. He paused, tears gathering in his eyes. He led me to his final message, the message of all prophets, from Adam to Noah, from Abraham to Jesus, and finally to Muhammad, peace be upon them all. A gasp rippled through the audience. Cameras zoomed in. He raised his hand slightly, his voice trembling but resolute. My name is no longer Pastor John Matthews. My name is Ysef Matthews, and I am a Muslim. The hall erupted, some shouting, some crying, some standing frozen in disbelief. Security guards stepped closer as people began to shout, "Blasphemy! He's lost his mind! This can't be real!" Ysef stood silently amid the chaos. The noise swirled around him, but inside there was nothing but peace. He closed his eyes for a moment and whispered quietly into the microphone, "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger." Those who listened closely could hear the adhan, faint but real, playing from a man's phone somewhere in the back. The coincidence made some fall silent. Others, even in their anger, could not help but feel a strange stillness settle over the room. Ysef opened his eyes again and looked at them with compassion. "I don't expect you to understand me today, but one day I pray you'll seek truth as I did, because truth, real truth, has no fear." Then he stepped away from the podium and walked slowly towards the exit. Reporters shouted his name, cameras flashed, some tried to block his way, but he didn't stop. Outside, the sun was rising, the light spilling over the church's white walls like the first dawn of a new life. He whispered to himself, smiling, "Alhamdulillah, all praise be to God." That moment, recorded, replayed, and debated across the world, became a symbol. To some, it was betrayal. To others, it was courage. But to Ysef, it was simply truth, spoken at last, no matter the cost. The days after the confession were not easy. The videos spread everywhere, shared, debated, condemned, celebrated. News anchors called it the most shocking conversion in modern Christianity. Some churches held special prayers for his return. Others denounced him outright. But Ysef Matthews no longer lived for approval. The storm had passed, and what remained was calm, the kind of peace that doesn't need an audience.
He moved into a small apartment near a local mosque in Dallas. Gone were the polished shoes, the luxury car, the spotlight. He now walked to the masjid 5 times a day, carrying a small prayer rug and a Quran that was worn from use. The first few months were quiet, rebuilding from nothing. He worked part-time at a community center, teaching refugees English and helping young converts adjust to their new faith. He smiled more now, laughed easily, slept soundly. One evening after Maghrib prayer, a young man approached him shyly. "Brother Ysef," he said, "I used to watch your sermons years ago. You helped me find God, and now, seeing you here in the masjid, it gives me hope again." Ysef smiled gently. Then perhaps, he said, that was always God's plan, that both of us would find Him in different ways, only to meet here. As time passed, Ysef began to receive invitations to speak, not from churches, but from universities, interfaith gatherings, and mosques around the world. His message was simple: truth and peace are not enemies, they are reflections of one God. In London, he spoke before thousands. "I did not leave Christ," he said. "I found the Christ who always pointed to the one, to Allah. I did not lose my faith, I purified it.
In Istanbul, he sat beside scholars of Islam. In Jakarta, he hugged orphans in a small madrasa. In Cairo, he prayed at Al-Azhar, tears falling onto the marble floor. And everywhere he went, people listened, not because he spoke with authority, but because he spoke with sincerity. Years later, a journalist asked him during an interview, "Do you ever regret it, walking away from everything?" He smiled, that same soft, knowing smile that had once silenced an entire church. "I did not walk away from everything," he replied. "I walked toward the truth. The world called it loss, I call it freedom." As the years passed, Ysef's hair turned white, but his spirit never dimmed. He continued teaching, writing, and guiding others who were lost between doubt and faith. On his last recorded lecture, his voice calm and filled with warmth, he said, "All my life I searched for God in words, in rituals, in buildings. But I found Him when I bowed my head to the ground alone, with nothing but sincerity. And if my story teaches anything, let it be this: whoever seeks the truth sincerely will find it, because God never hides from a heart that truly looks for Him." The camera lingered on him for a moment as he looked out the window, the evening sun casting a golden light across his face. Outside, the azan began to echo through the streets. He closed his eyes and smiled. "Another day," he whispered, "another chance to thank Him." And with that, the man once known as Pastor John Matthews, now Ysef, the believer, rose slowly, picked up his prayer rug, and walked toward the sound of prayer. The world would remember him for his courage, but he would want to be remembered for something far simpler, as a man who found peace in the oneness of God.